driving gives people a sense of control, but sometimes a split-second decision or one small mistake can turn a car into a death trap. In this video, we'll look at 5 of the most disturbing car crash deaths ever recorded. Real stories of people whose final moments were caught in brutal, unforgiving ways. These aren't just tragic accidents. These are the kinds of crashes that leave behind scars that never heal. It was supposed to be an ordinary evening, January 31st, 2025, in northeast Philadelphia. For 37-year-old Stephen Druitt, his fiancée Dominique Goods-Burke, and his 9-year-old son Ramesses, it had been just that. Simple, familiar. A shopping trip at Roosevelt Mall, a quiet return home. Then, in a single heartbeat, everything fell apart. At 6:10 p.m., not far away, a twin-engine Learjet 55 lifted off from northeast Philadelphia Airport. A medical transport flight. On board were 6 people. 11-year-old Valentina Guzman Murillo, her mother Leth, 2 pilots, a doctor, and a paramedic. Valentina had been in the U.S. for months, receiving treatment for a spinal condition. Now she was going home to Mexico. The plane climbed into the darkening sky, and then something went horribly wrong. In a nearby restaurant, 25-year-old Kasim Wangus was having dinner with friends. They were joking about the Final Destination movies. A deep, unnatural rumble rolled through the air. Then a flash, then fire. People ran to the windows. Some screamed. A jet had fallen from the sky. Medjet Flight 056 slammed into the ground just blocks from the mall. The impact sent fireballs and debris flying across entire neighborhoods. 4 homes were destroyed. Hundreds of buildings rattled. And amidst the chaos, Stephen's car, his family still inside, was struck. The flames consumed it almost instantly. When first responders arrived, they found Stephen's body still buckled in, lost to the fire. Dominique had somehow been pulled from the wreckage, but over 70% of her body was covered in burns. She was rushed to the hospital and placed in a medically induced coma, but after nearly 3 months of fighting, she passed away on April 27th. Little Ramesses survived, but barely. People watched, some recorded, few moved. But Wangus did. Without thinking, he ripped off his denim jacket, ran toward the burning boy, and threw the jacket over him, trying to smother the fire. Ramesses was twisting in pain. His shoes had melted into his skin. Wangus grabbed him, ran to a nearby police cruiser, and screamed for help. Inside the car, the boy kept asking for his father. But Stephen was already gone. Doctors at St. Christopher's Hospital later confirmed the unimaginable. Burns covered 90% of Ramesses' small body. Wangus, still holding his scorched jacket, broke down during his ride home. "He's just a little kid," he kept whispering, as if saying it might make it less horrifying. The next day, videos of the boy's suffering began circulating online. Clips showing a child burning. It took weeks before journalists helped him connect with the family. Ramesses had been moved to a burn unit in Boston. His mother, Jamie, finally spoke to Wangus. Her voice shook, but her words were clear. "You will have a seat at my table forever." Even in their grief, the family reached out. Alberta Amamira Brown, Ramesses' grandmother, checked in on Wangus. He had saved her grandson when no one else moved. Wangus later attended Stephen's funeral. Alberta wrapped her arms around him, called him a hero. But the moment haunted him. "It sneaks up on me," he admitted. "Sometimes I see Ramesses on fire again." It was May 29th, 2016. The sun was beginning to dip over Maui, casting long shadows along the winding curves of the Hana Highway. In the car were 37-year-old twin sisters, Alexandria and Anastasia Duval. To the outside world, their bond looked unbreakable. But that afternoon, as the SUV moved along the cliffs, witnesses noticed something deeply unsettling. The two were fighting, not just arguing, screaming, hair pulling, yelling. One moment they were stopped in the road, hazard lights flashing. The next, the Explorer suddenly lurched forward and flew off a 200-foot cliff. Only one sister survived, Alexandria. Behind the wheel, Anastasia, the passenger, was pronounced dead at the scene. The silence after the crash didn't last long. A teenager named Joseph Toleafoa had seen everything. He heard the shouting, he saw the physical struggle, and then he watched the SUV shoot forward, accelerating straight over the edge without even trying to stop. Another witness, standing nearby, recalled seeing the passenger, Anastasia, grab Alexandria's hair and yank on the steering wheel just before the vehicle veered off course. When investigators recovered the wreck, they found strands of Alexandria's hair still clenched in Anastasia's hands. Alexandria was airlifted to the hospital. She didn't even know her sister had died until days into her recovery. Initially, authorities arrested her, but without enough evidence, they let her go. For a moment, it seemed like the case might disappear, but it didn't. Months later, a grand jury re-indicted her for second-degree murder. She was arrested in New York and flown back to Hawaii. The trial that followed didn't unfold like most. Alexandria waived her right to a jury. Instead, she placed her fate in the hands of one man, Judge Peter Cahill. As the courtroom filled with testimony, a different picture of the twins began to emerge. They weren't just bonded, they were volatile. Born as Allison and Ann Daddow, the sisters had left a trail of chaos across several states. In 2008, they opened a yoga studio chain in Florida. For a time, they lived lavishly, but behind the peaceful image of incense and stretching mats was a reality filled with dysfunction, bankruptcy, lawsuits, unpaid debts, angry customers, and behind it all, constant conflict. People who knew them spoke of regular alcohol-fueled fights, screaming matches, unpredictable behavior. Anastasia's ex-boyfriend, Keith Weiss, painted one of the most haunting portraits. He described a terrifying drive years earlier when Anastasia, enraged, kicked the steering wheel while Alexandria screamed from the back seat. They were going 85 miles an hour. He warned them then, "You're going to kill someone." When they fled to Hawaii in 2015, hoping for a fresh start, their old habits followed. Police citations, missed court dates, public fights. The final unraveling came during a camping trip. Anastasia was with her boyfriend, Federico Bailey. Alexandria wasn't supposed to be there, but she came anyway, and within hours, the two sisters had driven off together. No one saw Anastasia alive again. After the crash, Bailey testified that Alexandria's behavior unsettled him. She wore Anastasia's clothes. She never cried, never talked about what happened. Instead, she lingered near him, too close. He said it felt like she was trying to be her sister. The prosecutors said it was all deliberate. They pointed to their past. They said this wasn't just a tragedy, it was a murder. But Alexandria's defense pushed back. They painted a different picture. One where Anastasia, furious, unstable, grabbed the wheel, pulled her sister's hair, and caused the crash herself. They said Alexandria didn't want this. She wasn't in control. She was just as much a victim of that chaos. And in February 2018, Judge Cahill agreed. He ruled Alexandria not guilty, not because the story made sense, not because it was easy to believe, but because, in his eyes, the evidence pointed to a physical struggle, not a calculated act of murder. Still, the doubts never went away.
We're learning more about the deadly crash that shut down I-20 in Kaufman County yesterday. 5 people died and a 6th person is in the hospital fighting for their life.
It was June 28th, 2025 in Kaufman County, Texas. For the McKellar family, it was the last stretch of a trip that should have ended safely in Fort Worth. Inside their Ford F-150 sat 3 generations. 52-year-old Zabar McKellar, a quiet, steady man, was behind the wheel. His wife, 45-year-old Christian, known to her loved ones as Sean, was at his side, her energy and warmth filling the truck the way it always did. In the back were their children, 15-year-old Case, a rising football star full of promise, and 20-year-old Evan, a college student with strength and intelligence beyond her years. With them, riding home, was their grandfather, 79-year-old Billy McKellar, a man with deep ties to East Texas, who had just attended a funeral in Tyler that very day. It was supposed to be an ordinary drive home. Instead, it became the moment everything changed. At the same time, barreling down the same stretch of interstate was a semi-truck driven by 27-year-old Alexis Osmani Gonzalez, companion of Florida. He was hauling under Hoper LLC. The affidavit later revealed the truth. He was exhausted, and at some point he fell asleep behind the wheel. His foot never touched the brakes. He was still moving at 75 miles per hour when the semi plowed into the back of the McKellar's pickup. The impact was catastrophic. The F-150 was crushed instantly, torn apart as the semi continued forward, colliding with 2 other 18-wheelers and several more vehicles, including a gray Jeep Compass. Emergency crews rushed to the scene. Police declared it a mass casualty event, but for the McKellar family, it was already too late. Zabar, Christian, their teenage son Case, and Billy were all pronounced dead at the scene. Their lives ended in an instant. The only survivor was 20-year-old Evan. She was airlifted to Parkland Hospital in Dallas, fighting for her life in the ICU. One of her feet had to be amputated. Though she lived, her road to recovery would be long and grueling. Another life was also lost in the chain reaction. 49-year-old Nicole Gregory of Dallas, who had been driving the Jeep Compass, was killed instantly. In total, 5 people were gone, and 1 young woman remained. Broken but alive. The devastation rippled far beyond that highway. Pastor Rodney McIntosh, who called himself an adopted son of the McKellar family, said through tears, "I don't know how you make sense of moments like these." Friends and neighbors remembered Zabar as strong and steady, Krishan as vibrant and caring. Their son Case had been the pride of North Crowley High School's football team, a young man who had just led his team to a championship. His classmates began planning a vigil in his honor. Evan, still fighting for her life in the hospital, became the symbol of resilience, even as her heart carried the unbearable weight of loss. Billy's friends mourned just as deeply. One of his closest companions, Von D. Mosley, recalled their decades-long bond. "We were like two peas in a pod," he said. "I'm grateful for the time I had with him." But behind the grief, questions grew. Why was that semi still on the road? Why didn't the driver stop? Investigators confirmed he had never hit the brakes. Hopper LLC already had a history of violations, including issues with drivers going over their allowed hours.
Celebrating her 21st birthday, killed in a horrific one-car crash on the Williamsburg Bridge. The man behind the wheel, a city traffic agent. He is now charged with DWI in the death of Amanda Miner.
It was March 16, 2017 in New York City. Amanda Miner had just turned 21. She was home in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, taking a break from Lafayette College in Pennsylvania, where she was studying to become a social worker. That evening, she celebrated her milestone birthday the way so many young people do, surrounded by family, taking in the Broadway show Wicked, sharing dinner, and later meeting friends in Manhattan. But Amanda never made it home. At around 3:15 a.m., she climbed into the back seat of a gray Infiniti G37, thinking she was in safe hands. Behind the wheel was 26-year-old Stephen Hoy, an off-duty NYPD traffic enforcement agent. In the passenger seat sat his colleague, 24-year-old Michael Camacho. Amanda trusted them. She believed she was simply catching a ride back to Brooklyn after a night of celebrating. What she didn't know was that Hoy had been drinking heavily, 8 shots of vodka and 2 mixed drinks. His blood alcohol level was 0.12, far above the legal limit. Worse, he wasn't just drunk, he was reckless. On the Williamsburg Bridge, where the speed limit is just 35 miles per hour, Hoy pushed the Infiniti to a staggering 111 miles per hour. The car roared through the night, headlights blurring, the city racing by in a haze. And then, in an instant, everything shattered. Hoy lost control. The car slammed into a divider, then smashed into a support pillar with such force that the vehicle ripped apart, splitting into pieces like paper under a blade. Amanda, who wasn't wearing a seatbelt, was thrown from the wreckage. The impact was catastrophic. Emergency crews arrived quickly, but it was already too late. Amanda was declared dead at the scene. Just hours before, she had been alive, joyful, and full of plans. Now her family was waking up to their worst nightmare. Amanda's mother, Virginia Cabrera Miner, stood outside their Brooklyn home in disbelief. Just the night before, she had celebrated her daughter's 21st birthday. Now she was telling reporters through tears, "She's gone. She was a wonderful girl, my youngest. We just celebrated her birthday, and now I'll never see her graduate." Her professors remembered her as a student who radiated kindness. Friends described her as driven and compassionate. When the case went to court, Amanda's older sister Linda broke down. She told the judge, "I am completely heartbroken. I no longer have a sister, I just want to be with my sister." Her father, Jeffrey, stood holding a photo of Amanda, pleading with Hoy to carry forward the positive energy Amanda had given to others. The pain in that courtroom was unbearable, grief filling every word spoken by a family who would never see Amanda again. Hoy tried to explain himself. At the scene of the crash, he lied to police, claiming he'd only had 2 drinks. But prosecutors uncovered the truth. He had been drinking heavily all night. Eventually, he pleaded guilty to second-degree manslaughter and vehicular manslaughter. He avoided a full trial, but he couldn't avoid prison. The judge sentenced him to 4 to 12 years. In court, Hoy said, "I'm very sorry. I hope her family can forgive me. We were celebrating her birthday and it was a traffic accident." But Amanda's family pushed back. She was not celebrating with him. She had trusted him, trusted that he would get her home safely. Instead, his recklessness had destroyed her future. Even as Hoy's mother insisted her son was a good man, a father to his 5-year-old daughter, and not a heavy drinker, Judge Melissa Jackson made it clear. "You will serve time," she told him, "but your punishment will also be living with what you did. That will stay with you forever." It was just after midnight, on June night in 2023, when 5 people climbed into a red Toyota Corolla and drove off into the darkness. Juan Negrete Falls Road in Bochier, Victoria stretched ahead of them. Inside the car were 5 friends from the small town of Hamilton: 31-year-old Alicia Montebello, 17-year-old Lucas Garzolai, 15-year-old Joshua Elms, 14-year-old Megan Fox, and another 17-year-old girl whose name has never been released. They had spent the night together, teenagers and a familiar adult, caught in the blur between boredom, restlessness, and recklessness. Somewhere between 4 a.m. and 9:30 a.m., something went terribly wrong. The car veered off the road and slammed into a tree. By the time anyone found them, it was too late. 4 of the 5 were already gone. Emergency crews didn't arrive until hours later, around noon. The crash site had gone unnoticed in the early light. When they finally pulled the mangled Corolla from the woods, they found handwritten notes inside the car. Scribbled in teenage script were words like, "Drive safe and love people. Help people." A cruel irony scrawled in hope before the wreck. Megan Fox, just 14 years old, was among the dead. Her sister, Kayla Dean, posted a tribute online that pierced like a knife. "Rest in peace, my precious angel. Life isn't going to be the same without your goofy personality or that sweetheart." Megan had her whole life ahead of her, full of school dances, sleepovers, and dreams. Now nothing but silence. Lucas Garzolai, 17, had a passion for cars. He was proud of it. He even posted photos of modified vehicles on Facebook, his bio reading, "You only live once, so make it a good life." He had recently marched with pride in his town's Anzac Day Parade, a member of the 314 Army Cadet Unit in Warrnambool. His friend Joshua Elms marched beside him. Joshua was 15, kind, funny, a little impulsive, and full of energy. He loved motorbikes, drumming, and his younger siblings. He had just landed his first job at Kohl's. That night, before the crash, he attended a Christian youth program, something he rarely missed. But after coming home, he and his parents exchanged tense words. There was an argument. His mother, Leanne, said she told him goodnight and that she loved him. Moments later, she heard the door click open and close. "I'm just going for a walk," he said. She never saw him again. A week earlier, his father, Matthew, had warned him about dangerous choices, about risky driving, the wrong people. Joshua had confessed to doing car stunts, brushing it off with, "I'm not that stupid, Dad." But among those people his parents were worried about was Alicia Montebello. Her record wasn't a mystery. In 2015, she was caught driving an unregistered vehicle under the influence. Her license was suspended. In 2016, she was caught again, this time while disqualified. She received a suspended jail sentence, and yet, years later, she was still driving, and still a danger. Police haven't confirmed who was behind the wheel that night, but they believe the car was flying down the dark road at more than 100 kilometers per h. A video surfaced on Snapchat, capturing a voice asking, "What speed are we doing?" A woman replies, 11, minus 130. Another voice, "Sweet." Moments later, the car hit the tree. Victoria Police Assistant Commissioner Glenn Weir described the crash as incomprehensible, the speed horrifying. He added that some of the teens likely weren't wearing seatbelts. The one survivor, the unnamed 17-year-old girl, was barely clinging to life and rushed to Alfred Hospital in Melbourne. In the days that followed, grief swept through Hamilton, a close-knit town of just 10,000 people. Flowers and handwritten notes were left outside Bainbridge College. A moment of silence was held at St. Mary's Catholic Church. Joshua's mother, Leanne, returned to the media not just to mourn, but to warn. Her voice cracked as she said, "Think of your loved ones when you leave the front door." She wasn't just speaking for her son. She was speaking for every parent who never got that last good night back. It was July 21st, 2024 in West Yorkshire, England. Shane Roller, 33, and his partner, Shannon Morgan, 30, had just finished a peaceful walk with their 2 young daughters, 9-year-old Ruby and 4-year-old Lily. The family piled into their silver Ford Focus, heading home along the A61, a stretch of road that should have been just another part of a regular day. But their eldest daughter, 11-year-old Poppy, wasn't with them. She'd chosen to stay behind in Barnsley, spending the afternoon with a family friend, Paul Heppel, and his daughter. But at around 3:45 p.m., the phone rang, and everything changed. Speeding down that same stretch of the A61 was a motorcycle driven by 56-year-old Christopher Barton. His wife, Janine, 48, was riding pillion. Reports later revealed that Christopher was trying to overtake another vehicle when it happened. He collided head-on with the Roller Morgan family's car. The crash was devastating. By the time emergency services reached the scene, it was already too late. All 6 lives, Shane, Shannon, Ruby, Lily, Christopher, and Janine, were gone. The road between Shaw Lane and Warren Lane was sealed off. but the horror of what had happened couldn't be contained. Superintendent Alan Travis called it a tragedy beyond words. Flowers began to appear at the crash site, candles, teddy bears. Tributes flooded social media, messages filled with grief, disbelief, and pain. "My heart just hurts," wrote Poppy's cousin Beth. "My heart is ripped into a million pieces," Shane's brother Callum said. But the most unbearable weight fell on one small girl. Back in Barnsley, Paul Heppel was left with a task no adult should ever face, telling a child that her entire world was gone. Earlier that morning, Shannon had called and asked if Poppy could stay a little longer. "She was having fun with our daughter," Paul later recalled. "We were just finishing dinner when her aunt got the call and ran out the door. Everything flipped upside down after that." In the days that followed, grief turned into action. Paul launched a GoFundMe campaign to support Poppy. The goal was modest, £3,000, just enough to help with essentials. But the world responded with something more powerful than anyone expected. Within days, donations surged past £70,000, then £300,000, then £482,700. Over 22,500 people gave. Paul made it clear every penny would go into a trust fund for her. Her Aunt Faye was listed as the official beneficiary. None of the funds would be touched until they were legally transferred and secured for Poppy's future. But money can't fix everything. The emotional scars, the ones no amount of funding can heal, remain. The crash scene had been so catastrophic that another driver, who wasn't involved in either vehicle, was arrested on suspicion of dangerous driving. He was later released on bail. The investigation continues, but answers are hard to come by. And what about Poppy? She's gone back to school. Paul says she was nervous, unsure like any child would be after such a loss. But she's finding her footing, slowly, carefully. Therapy has helped, so have the support groups. Organizations like Break have stepped in, along with Compass B, grief counselors, and family liaison officers who've made sure she isn't walking through this alone. She still loves football, still finds escape in music, especially Taylor Swift. Those small comforts, those pieces of normalcy, matter more than ever now. In one heartfelt update, Paul wrote, "Your generosity has not only secured Poppy's future, but has brought light during a very dark time. But the road ahead is long. Some days are heavier than others. There are questions that haunt. Why them? Why not me? The kind of questions that can't be answered, only carried."
49 arriving. We gotta block the intersection. Anyone inside the vehicle?
It was the early hours of November 2nd, 2021 in Las Vegas. Most of the Strip had gone to sleep, except for the neon glow, still flickering, still breathing. Somewhere off Rainbow Boulevard, 23-year-old Tina Tintor was on her way home. She had just dropped off a friend. Her dog, Max, had gone for a walk with her earlier that night, something Tina often did. It was a part of her calm routine, a way to wind down from her day. Tina was driving her Toyota RAV4, just minutes from the house she shared with her family. Speeding down the same boulevard was a black Chevrolet Corvette Stingray. Behind the wheel, Henry Ruggs III. At 22, he was a rising star in the NFL, known for his speed on the field. But on this night, that speed became something else entirely. According to police, Ruggs was flying down the road at 156 miles per hour. His blood alcohol level was more than twice the legal limit. He had been drinking at a golf driving range at the MGM Grand just before, laughing, playing, taking shots. Videos captured it all. And then, just past 3:40 a.m., the impossible happened in a flash. His Corvette slammed into the back of Tina's SUV. It burst into flames. Trapped inside were Tina and Max. Witnesses would later recall hearing screaming. Tina never made it out. She had come so far in her life. Born in Croatia in 1998, her family fled during the Balkan conflict. They escaped bombings, raids, violence, eventually making their way to Serbia, only to face more instability. In 2001, her mother brought Tina and her brother to America as refugees. They landed in Las Vegas, hoping for a second chance. Tina made the most of it. She worked hard. She smiled often. She dreamed of becoming a computer programmer. She had a job with an insurance company working remotely. She was finally about to receive her U.S. citizenship. That dream was days away, but in a matter of seconds, it was gone. Henry Ruggs survived the crash. So did his girlfriend, Kiara, who had been in the passenger seat. When Ruggs appeared in court, he wore a neck brace. He faced felony charges: DUI resulting in death, reckless driving, firearm possession. If convicted, he could serve up to 46 years in prison. He was released on $150,000 bail and confined to his $1.1 million home, fitted with alcohol monitoring devices. His passport was taken. He was no longer allowed to drive. Tina's uncle, Predrag Kamazek, said what no family should have to say. We escaped all that over there. War and bombing. We come here, and this happens. Her brother, Georgia, struggled to speak of the night. He said she had been doing what she always did, spending time with Max, seeing friends, laughing. The community grieved. They painted a mural near the crash site. Her friends spoke of the future plans they'd made. Tina wanted to visit Serbia again. She had talked about it the night she died. She was excited, hopeful. Her friend Bana described her as steady, loyal. A year after the crash, Tina's family released a quiet, heartbroken statement. We are beyond devastated. We hope justice will be served, but the legal process dragged on. Ruggs's attorneys argued that emergency crews were too slow, that maybe, just maybe, Tina could have survived. But Clark County officials were blunt. No one could have survived what happened inside that car, not with that fire, not with those flames. It was the early morning of January 12th, 2025, in Castleford, West Yorkshire. The temperature had dropped to a brutal -5 degrees Celsius, and the roads were glazed in ice, turning every turn into a risk. In the quiet of dawn, when most people were still asleep, 18-year-old Taylor Lupton was riding in the passenger seat of a white Volkswagen Golf. It was just after 6:20 a.m., a time when the world should still feel calm, but for Taylor, everything was about to change forever. Taylor wasn't just another young man. He had recently become a father, a boy from nearby Pontefract who was described as the kind of soul who could light up any room. Friends called him crazy sweet, a mix of energy, humor, and kindness. He had his whole life in front of him. But that morning, as he sat beside two 21-year-olds, a man and a woman, none of them could have known what the next few minutes would hold. They were driving down Weldon Road, a stretch locals had long whispered about, calling it cursed and dangerous. The car moved across a junction, but then something went horribly wrong. Witnesses said it was sudden, as if the vehicle had been yanked out of control by invisible hands. The Golf swerved violently, mounted the pavement, tore through a wire fence, and smashed into heavy bushes. The momentum didn't stop there. It slid down a steep slope, unstoppable, before plunging into the shadows of an oxidation tank at the Walale sewage works. The tank was nearly empty, but deep enough to swallow the car from the road's view. By the time emergency crews arrived, the scene looked like a nightmare. The Volkswagen sat crumpled at the bottom, its windows shattered, one door wrenched open as if the car itself had screamed. Just yards away, they found Taylor's body. His two companions were pulled out alive and rushed to the hospital. But for Taylor, there was no saving him. Shock turned to anger when it was revealed the two survivors were arrested for suspected involvement in dangerous driving that may have caused Taylor's death. Locals stood in disbelief. One man recalled how you couldn't even see the car from the road. Another, 66-year-old Richard Iverson, said he'd seen crashes there before and had always feared that bend. That morning, he spotted a license plate lying on the footpath. He thought it was nothing more than a petty theft, only later realizing it was a clue to a much darker tragedy. As news spread, grief spilled out onto social media. Taylor's girlfriend, Megan, poured out her heart in a post that shattered those who read it. "You were my world. You made me better. I love you so much. I wish this wasn't real. I'll carry you in my heart forever." Friends wrote tributes filled with disbelief and sorrow. "Rest in peace, Taylor Lupton, you crazy sweet soul," Kira Reed said. "Just hours before, you were smiling, dancing, happy." Another friend added, "You were amazing, Tay. Never a dull moment. We love you." Soon, the crash site became a place of mourning. Flowers, candles, and handwritten notes covered the ground. A message from his great-grandmother read, "To my lovely great-grandson, Taylor, taken too soon." His parents left a note that simply said, "Love you so much, Mom and Dad." His siblings wrote, "Going to miss you, big brother." The heartbreak in those words painted a picture of a family ripped apart, of a daughter who would grow up without her father. Police later confirmed what many had feared. The roads were slick with ice. Visibility was poor, and there were no warning signs at that stretch of road. Photos from the scene showed the car's broken path down the slope into the tank, a chilling reminder of how fragile life can be. Taylor was gone before his daughter's first birthday, before he had the chance to live the future everyone believed he was destined for. And now, the investigation continues, but no answer will ever bring him back. It was a Sunday night in March 2019 in Odessa, Ukraine. 33-year-old Victoria Kravchenko was sitting in the passenger seat of a BMW X6 next to 22-year-old Shamil Gav as the car raced through the streets. Witnesses said they were speeding alongside a Porsche, engines roaring, chasing adrenaline. What neither of them knew was that within minutes this ride would end in flames. Victoria wasn't just anyone. She was a mother of two, a daughter and a businesswoman. She carried with her a story that connected the quiet streets of Odessa to the glamour of Hollywood. Her father, Valery Kravchenko, was once stunned by a revelation that linked their family tree to none other than Sylvester Stallone. It began decades earlier when Stallone's mother, Jackie, began digging into her family's roots in the Soviet Union. With help from Mikhail Gorbachev himself, the KGB traced her grandmother's line back to Odessa. The trail led straight to Valery's family, proving that the Kravchenkos and Stallones were distant cousins. Jackie flew to Odessa, where she met Valery face to face. He thought it was a joke, until she looked him in the eye and said, "Hello, Valery, how are you? It looks like you are the only living relation of our family." Back then, Valery was breaking barriers, opening the first privately owned gas station in the Soviet Union. He later introduced Jackie to his daughter, Victoria. She was young, full of energy, and had no idea how strange and extraordinary that meeting really was. Years later, Victoria recalled how surreal it felt to discover a bloodline connecting her to one of Hollywood's biggest icons. She laughed about how nobody believed her at first, until she explained how Jackie Stallone had sat with her like a girlfriend, offering travel tips, cracking jokes, and radiating energy even at her age. She remembered thinking her father and Sylvester shared the same piercing eyes. By 2019, Victoria had built a life of her own. She was a successful businesswoman, working in her father's companies, raising her children, and carrying herself with the quiet confidence of someone proud of her roots. But that March night, all of it ended in seconds. As the BMW tore through the streets, it slammed into a parked Hyundai Sonata. The impact sent the car spinning, metal screaming as it lost control. Then came the moment no one could take back. The BMW smashed into a utility pole carrying high-voltage wires. In an instant, the night lit up with fire. The car exploded, flames swallowed the vehicle, and Victoria and Shamil were trapped inside. There was no escape. By the time emergency crews arrived, the scene was already beyond saving. All that was left was a blazing wreck, the smell of smoke heavy in the air, and 2 lives cut short. Security cameras captured the exact moment the car spun out of control, a few seconds that replayed over and over as investigators reviewed the footage. A thrill ride turned to silence. It was July 19, 2025, in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. A single piece of news swept through the kingdom like wildfire. Prince Al-Walid bin Khaled bin Talal Saud, known across the world as the Sleeping Prince, had passed away. He was only 36 years old. For 2 decades, his life had been frozen in time, suspended between hope and heartbreak, as millions quietly followed his story. Families whispered his name in prayers, strangers held on to the thought of a miracle, and his father refused to let go. But after 20 years in a hospital bed, that fragile chapter finally came to an end. To understand the weight of this moment, we need to go back to where it all began. Prince Al-Walid was born on April 18, 1989, into one of the most powerful families in Saudi Arabia. His father, Prince Khaled bin Talal, was a respected royal. His uncle, Prince Al-Walid bin Talal, was a billionaire known worldwide. His grandfather, Prince Talal, was one of the sons of King Abdulaziz, the very founder of modern Saudi Arabia. Al-Walid's future was written in power and responsibility. From a young age, he was raised with discipline, honor, and the expectation of greatness. By the age of 15, he was already training at a prestigious military academy in London, preparing for a future that seemed unstoppable. And then, in an instant, it was all taken away. In 2005, while in the United Kingdom, Al-Walid was in a devastating car crash. The impact left him with catastrophic brain injuries and severe internal damage. London doctors fought to stabilize him, but the truth was grim. He was flown back to Riyadh and admitted to King Abdulaziz's medical city. There, his body lived, but his eyes never opened again. Machines kept him alive. A ventilator breathed for him. A feeding tube nourished him. And from that day on, the prince who was once so full of promise was locked away in silence. Doctors had little hope. Many said recovery was impossible. In 2015, 10 years into his coma, the medical team even urged his father to consider ending life support. But Prince Khaled would not hear of it. He stayed by his son's side every single day, gripping his hand, whispering prayers, and believing that one day his son would return. He shared photos of himself holding Al-Walid's hand, decorating the hospital room for Ramadan, Eid, and Saudi National Day. It became less of a hospital ward and more of a shrine of devotion. And the world watched. For years, family, friends, and religious leaders visited al-Walid. His younger brothers, Saud and Muhammad, spoke to him, updated him on family life, prayed beside him. They clung to hope in the smallest gestures. And then, in 2020, something extraordinary happened. A video surfaced online, showing the prince appearing to move his fingers and even lift his hand when someone called his name. The footage spread like wildfire. People everywhere believed this was the miracle they had been waiting for. Hope surged again. But doctors crushed the dream, saying it was nothing more than reflexes of a body trapped in a vegetative state. Still, the people refused to stop believing. They called him the sleeping prince. They shared old videos of him in uniform, young and strong, and they waited for the day he would awaken. But that day never came. On July 19th, 2025, after 20 long years in the same hospital room, Prince al-Walid slipped away. His father broke the news on X, posting a haunting black and white photo of his son along with a plea for prayers. The next day, funeral prayers were held at Imam Turki bin Abdullah Mosque in Riyadh. The doors were opened to the public, and thousands came to pay their respects. Crowds gathered outside Al-Fakhraya Palace, mourning a prince whose story had touched hearts far beyond the kingdom's borders. No official explanation was given. No one knows if his condition had worsened or if, after 2 decades of waiting, the family had finally made the impossible decision to let go. What is known is the impact he left behind. The hashtag #SleepingPrince trended once more as tributes poured in from around the globe. People remembered not just the tragedy of his youth, but the love that surrounded him for 20 years.